After seemingly endless delays and speculation, last week we finally got Kanye West and Ty Dolla $ign's collab album, VULTURES. And I have some thoughts. Not to really spoil my opinion of this record this early on, but this is probably the most I've had to say about a new album in a minute. So let's just jump into the ranking of every track from worst to best, starting with... Yeah, I mean, I've been seeing a lot of people trash this one, and while I don't think it's horrible or anything, Hood Rat is pretty easily the weakest track on here, and it really only has to do with one thing. That goddamn sample that just repeats the word Hood Rat over and over, it just gets so annoying after a while. It reminds me of the sequel to WAP that no one asked for by Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion, Bongos.
Bong, 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 bong.
Now there are definitely some things about the track I like. For example, I thought Kanye and Ty trading lines in the chorus and first verse was pretty cool. The Father Stretch My Hands reference is also kind of funny. And besides the sample, I think the production is pretty nice, besides some of the strange mixing. We'll get to more of it later, but there are definitely some questionable mixes on this album, which unfortunately drag down a lot of otherwise good songs on here, with Hood Rat being a great example.
Gang leaders with me all times. I don't know who I fuck last.
Okay, seriously, why in the world was this track not only the first single released for this album, but also the title track of the whole album, when it's one of the worst songs on it? Kanye's mind is truly an enigma, but either way, this track is again not that great. Bump J is a really irritating voice in my opinion, and his bars certainly don't save the performance. It also has arguably one of Kanye's worst verses of all time, and the instrumental is terribly generic and basic for a Kanye West song. But even with this track, there are some saving graces. After all, Dirk does well, and Ty Dolla $ign absolutely carries. Not only is his verse the best, but I think even the song knows that fact because the instrumental just like randomly decides to become better during his part, which absolutely enhances performance.
Couple gray hairs up in my beard that's showing my maturity, yeah. Hey.
I'll say my thoughts for a future music hot take video, but genuinely, I don't think Ty missed a single time across this project. So don't expect a lot of criticism towards any of his parts. And last thing before we move on, the Havoc version of VULTURES that Kanye released is like way better than the original. It's crazy how much the quality changes simply by just using a different beat.
Slow down, you on your way to an overdose. Plus these texts getting way to a...
Now, while the last two tracks I'd consider to be around the mid-range, Keys of My Life marks the first track that I'd call decent. It's interesting though, since despite me liking it, I really have very little to say. Probably the least out of any track on the album. Kanye's verses are just fine besides the Ben Z, Gen Z line, which just makes my skin crawl. And Ty Dolla $ign is like barely on here, so there's not much to say about his part. I actually thought India Love had the best part on the song. Her outro is really smooth, and the production overall is really solid. But yeah, alright track overall.
Guess a real nigga couldn't take no more, Niggas mad 'cause they can't...
First thing King immediately gets points for is the production, especially for those insanely heavy, almost metallic sounding drums. They add so much oomph to all of Kanye and Ty's lines. And speaking of the lines, barring any problematic lyrical content, specifically in the chorus, I love how Ye and Ty trade lines across the verses. The contrast between Kanye's manic and aggressive delivery with Ty's melodic vocal lines is super smooth. In general, I'd say there's really great chemistry between the two across the entire project, which is something I was definitely hoping for. Really the biggest drawback to the track is its message. Like I said, I'm going to be saving my overall thoughts on the album, and specifically my criticism of the lyrics for after the ranking, so I won't say too much now, but man, is it really hard to enjoy this track when the ethos of it is just so wrong.
I'm tryna fuck some right now. That little she tryna fuck some.
I worry as we get later into this list that I'm going to be repeating myself a lot, since to be honest, a lot of the songs follow a similar formula. Like I swear there's like 3 other songs on here that have the exact same structure as Fuck Some. But as for why it's my least favorite of those, it's mainly just because Kanye's verse is really weak, and the high-pitched bridge he does is just kind of weird and doesn't really fit the song at all in my opinion. But fortunately, I think everyone else on here does well. Ty once again comes through with a really catchy chorus. Playboi Carti's post-chorus is also really great, and I actually think his part on here overall is better than his part on Carnival. And then the part where Travis comes in after Ye is super clean, although his verse is just alright. Definitely a lot of moving parts with this track, but I think it all comes together well for the most part.
I'm just here to get paid. I'm just here to get paid. I'm just here.
Paid genuinely makes me so upset because it could have been so much better. The instrumental is such a big highlight with its house influence, which is so cool to hear on a Kanye song, since really the only other song in his discography all that similar, if I remember correctly, is Fade. Ty Dolla $ign's contributions are also fantastic. His chorus and verse both sound great over a dance rhythm, but man, Kanye's verse is just terrible, and it's not even due to any problematic lyrics. He just puts on the strangest baby voice for most of his verse, and it just sounds awful, like there's no other way to put it. but besides the pretty noticeable blemish, it's otherwise a phenomenal song. Honestly, if we are getting another installment of Vultures, I vote that it's just this album again, but Kanye rewrites all of his verses to be better.
Benjamin Frank, that's my neighbor. Deep in the night, let's get dangerous. We not the type to point.
Now, Paperwork is a track that really had to grow on me after first listen. Not that there's anything wrong with that, it's just a track that doesn't really hit you instantly. First thing I'll say is that Kanye's verse is actually pretty good. Definitely gave me some strong Hold My Liquor vibes, but I mean, Hold My Liquor is like a top 10 all-time Kanye song for me, so the slight retreading isn't really a problem. Quavo also did way better than I expected, given I'm not really a fan of his solo stuff. But once again, Ty Dolla $ign is my favorite verse. It's pretty short, but I don't know, that melody he hits is just so infectious. However, I can't talk about this track without mentioning that crazy-ass guitar sample that breaks up each verse.
Lay back, enjoy the ride.
Apparently it's a commonly used sound in Brazilian funk, at least according to Genius, but let me tell you, that shit slaps.
All this money on the floor. 10 racks, throw it up, watch how I do it.
Okay, I know I've been praising Ty Dolla $ign a lot so far, but again, he kills this hook. I swear this track is like perfect for the club. Not that I know what kind of music they play in it, I don't think I'm even allowed in one legally, but it just has that sound to it, you know? Especially during YG's verse, when you get those record scratches and cowbells.
Any, many, money, no she choosing. Fuck her like a lover, I'm confused.
Speaking of YG, his part is definitely my least favorite, but he does well enough, and definitely doesn't drag the record down. You've also got that Nipsey Hussle intro, which, while mixed super weird, is still nice to hear on a Kanye track, considering Nipsey's remix of Runaway all the way back in 2011. Hell, I even like Kanye's verse on here. It's nothing all that deep, just pretty standard flexing, but not only is it much more acceptable on a more fun track like Do It, but his flow is also a major highlight. This is a good one. Man, now this is a good-ass intro to the record, despite it sounding pretty different from most of it. First of all, Stars automatically gets points for sampling Dijon in such a beautiful way. And by the way, if you don't know who Dijon is, I'd highly recommend his song The Dress, one of my favorites of 2021. But back to Stars, the sample as well as the rolling drums that come in during Kanye's verse make for easily one of my favorite instrumentals on the record, which is saying something considering the production is probably this album's best aspect. But besides the beat, Kanye has some nice singing during his verse, and stop me if you've heard this before, but Ty's part sounds amazing, especially with the falsetto he hits, it's just so nice. Just add an extra minute to this track and cut out this terrible line from Ye, and you've got yourself a phenomenal intro. Good Don't Die is another track that really had to grow on me. I think it's definitely going to be the sleeper of the album.
So I'd rather be by my fucking self.
The track for one has so much obvious 808s and heartbreak influence to it, which is something I never expected from Kanye in 2024, but it's super cool nonetheless. Hell, you even got some of the vocal distortion straight from Streetlights on some of Kanye's lines.
Don't die, don't die.
The Donna Summer sample is also utilized super well, perfectly popping in and out of the instrumental. And while Ty Dolla doesn't steal the show here, I think he follows up Kanye's melody pretty well. You've also got those stunning strings that appear in the outro, that part is just so pleasant. And to top it all off, lyrically speaking, this is probably the least problematic of any song on Vultures, which isn't necessarily a high bar to cross, but after so many deplorable bars on this album from Ye, it's just a nice refresher. Maybe a little high for some people, but I was really impressed with Talking as a single, and it's only gotten better after the album's release in my opinion. Now I'm not going to really criticize Northwest's verse since she's a literal child, but I will say, it is pretty wild that her verse is genuinely better than like 3 of Kanye's on this album. The cheerleader sample and James Blake background vocals also make for a really nice instrumental, but the real standout of the track is the second half, with Ty Dolla $ign delivering a pretty poignant verse about his own daughter. And of course the harmonizing he does in the chorus sounds glorious. I actually think they tweaked the mix from the original version a little bit, and it sounds so much better now, thankfully.
This the Game of Thrones, Yeezy not the clones, Elon where my rocket ship.
Now if Paid was a track that made me upset, Carnival makes me completely irate. This legitimately had so much potential to be the next Off the Grid, and one of the few tracks on Vultures that actually holds up with some of Kanye's classics. And while I still think it is a very good song, the mixing is just so off on it to a distracting degree. In general, I don't really like to criticize songs based on how they're mixed, since for one, I feel like it's kind of a nitpicky criticism, and 9 times out of 10 when a song is mixed a little strangely, it only takes like a few more listens for your ears to get used to it. But on Carnival, it's just too noticeable to ignore in my opinion. And it sucks too, because if this song had a cleaner mix, it'd easily be top 1 on Vultures for me. Like, the choir utilized in the instrumental, along with those distorted noises that surround the beat, make for one of the hardest instrumentals I've ever heard on a Kanye song. You've also got that insanely hard verse and hook from Rich the Kid of all people, and then there's Ty and Cardi who both come through with great verses as well, and then even Kanye's Yeezus-esque verse would fit perfectly over the chaotic beat if it was just mixed better. I know it sounds like I hate this track with all the criticism I've given, but to be clear, I do still really like this song, but it just frustrates me to no end knowing it could have been 10 times better with just the slightest bit of tweaking. Who knows though, Kanye has shown us before with The Life of Pablo that he isn't afraid to change the mix of an album after it's already released. So here's hoping Carnival is the first one that gets fixed, if it does.
Go make an anthem for hoes. It's my life, not a quote. I feel like I'll be the murder.
And with Problematic, we've officially reached the best of the best on Vultures in my opinion. Man, you have no idea how much I wish this track was the closer of the album instead of King. Not only because it's just a much better song, but with the sound of it giving off such heavy old Kanye vibes, and then with the release of the record coinciding with the 20-year anniversary of the College Dropout, it works so well as one last bit of nostalgia to end off the record. But no matter what spot it's at, the song itself is pretty damn amazing. Like I said, the soul sample-based production sounds incredible, and Kanye's verses, minus this terrible line, are consistently some of the best on the entire album. How I brand all these clothes, how every tantrum I throw make an anthem for hoes, this is my life, not a quote, is just a classic Kanye line. You've also got the Hoboken shout-out in the second verse, and I can't say this one, but it's very funny. Ty Dolla $ign also, while not being used as much as I like, comes through with some great melodies to break up Kanye's lines. It's just a phenomenal throwback, and quite honestly, a kind of track that I wasn't sure Kanye would even ever be able to make again.
You should beg forgiveness.
You know, I never expected Beg Forgiveness to crack my top 3 when I originally heard it previewed at the Miami listening party. But man, this track really got the Phoenix rebirth from my least favorite song previewed to one of my favorites on the entire record. For one, Chris Brown's vocals have just been massively improved across the first half, and I don't even really know how they did it. They just sound better than they did at the rave. And of course, Ty Dolla $ign doing background vocals can never go wrong. The instrumental too, it's super simple, but something about it just mesmerizes me whenever I give the track a listen. We also get a pretty nice Kanye verse to transition from the first half to the second. And talking about the second half of the track, holy shit, Ty Dolla $ign went off. His emphatic singing over the constant choir repetitions and strings is maybe my favorite part of the entire record. It's just magical. The song at 6 minutes is definitely a long ride, and I could totally see some people saying that this one's just too stagnant for them, but in my opinion, Beg Forgiveness works extremely well for what it's going for, and definitely wins the Most Improved Song award.
Burning like a candlelight, your love is dangerous.
Out of the 3 or 4 songs that follow a similar formula that I mentioned earlier, Burn is the best by a mile for a few reasons. First off, Ty Dolla $ign's chorus is perfect. I know, I'm sorry, I keep repeating myself, but the man just simply did not miss on his hooks here. The instrumental too, man, it's just so clean. Like, why can't the other songs on this album be mixed as well as this one is? Everything just fits together so nicely here. But above all else, Burn has Kanye's best verse on Vultures by a pretty large margin. Way too many verses on this record just feel like Ye not even trying and just saying controversial stuff for attention, but here he actually sounds like he cares about his bars on here, and that passion comes through in his performance. Despite how short it is, there are so many highlights. When my campaign turned to campaign, I burned 8 billion to take off my chains. You charging cookie, that's bang for your buck. If you kissin' on the mouth, you ain't charging enough. There's even a funny and relatively tasteful R. Kelly reference. There is really just no weak link to this track, from the rapping, to the hook, to the instrumental, and it's a much needed reminder that Kanye still can make future classics when everything's on point. Now I'll be honest here, the difference in quality between Back to Me and Burn is pretty small, but I gave the edge to Back to Me simply because it's 5 minutes of greatness versus Burn, which is less than 2. Where do I even start? You've got the phenomenal instrumental for one, like those live sounding drums sound so good, especially with the vocal sample implemented, and as unexpected as it seems, yeah, Ty Dolla $ign has a ridiculously catchy hook again. Kanye's verse is also a lot of fun with the Steve Urkel line, and I don't care what anyone says, the beautiful big titty butt naked women just don't fall at the sky, you know part is so fire. Does it go on for a little too long? Maybe, but I can definitely appreciate it from a meme perspective. And then oh my god, Freddie Gibbs' verse on the back half of this track, whew! Just turn a bird bitch to my ex like I was Elon. Put you on a track, have you working like I appointed you. Oh, how you gonna go blocking your blessing when I anointed you? And then my personal favorite, Redbone bitches, they king me like I'm a black checker. Overall, Back to Me is just another track where everything just works perfectly, and makes for my personal favorite song on Vultures. But even though that's the end of the ranking, please stick around for my final thoughts on the album as a whole, since I think it is the most important part for people to see. But yeah, let's just get into what I think about the record overall. Now, if I had to describe my thoughts on Vultures in just one sentence, I'd say it's overall a very good compilation of songs. But notice how I didn't say it's a very good album, because while there are plenty of tracks on here that I really like, I can't help but feel that there's a serious lack of cohesion and theming around the tracklist for me, to even call this an album, let alone a Kanye album. I mean, think about it, every other Kanye West album has some sort of overarching vision with it. The College Dropout is all about Kanye's hard work and character that led him to eventually find success. Graduation is Ye's King of the World, larger-than-life era, and the music on it reflects the theme perfectly. Yeezus literally tells you what the entire record's about just through the title. The Life of Pablo is an overarching narrative of the chaos that occurs in Kanye's mind on a daily basis. Even Kanye's later work like Jesus is King and Donda have their heavy religious themes, with the latter also dealing with Kanye's grief over his mother. But then I look at Vultures and I just really struggle to see what this album's trying to say. And while I do understand that a lot of the music is going for a more fun, lighthearted vibe, I still can't help but feel like a lot of these tracks won't age as well as the rest of Ye's discography. But now let's finally talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to this record. And if you haven't really been paying attention up until this point, I'd highly recommend listening to this part, since I think it is the most important thing to talk about when it comes to this album specifically. Simply put, I think a majority of the stuff Kanye says on this album when it comes to his previous anti-Semitic comments is just plainly disgusting. Whether it be the actual equivalent of saying "I'm not racist, I have black friends" on Stars with this line, to him seemingly bragging about being called an anti-Semite on King, to the now infamous line on the track Vultures. This sort of stuff is just not okay to be saying in any song, especially in songs that are going to be streamed as much as they will because it's Kanye. And I know Kanye is known for saying some wild shit in his songs, but I think on Vultures the lyrics have officially crossed the line from just controversial to straight up reprehensible. Hence why I try to avoid talking about a lot of the more problematic lyrics on here in my rankings. It's the same feeling as listening to Travis Scott rap about how packed out his shows are on Utopia after the Astroworld tragedy. It just feels really uncomfortable. So while the overall score is pretty high right now, don't be surprised if this album ages worse and worse as Kanye continues to spiral down this dark path. And I hate to say it as a massive Kanye West fan, but I think with the release of Vultures, Kanye's fall from grace is officially undeniable. Alright, and that does it for this video. Sorry if it got a little serious at the end, but I think it's important for me to acknowledge this kind of stuff when it comes to Kanye whenever I talk about him from now on, so people don't get the wrong idea on where I stand. Anyways, if you enjoyed, make sure to like the video, subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment telling me your ranking of every track on the record. But yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching.